Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Son of a Blitch podcast. I'm your host, George Blitch, and today I'm here with a very special guest, Judge Kevin Sharp. Judge Sharp is a former United States District Judge who served for 6 years on the federal bench after he was nominated by President Obama, receiving full bipartisan support with his unanimous confirmation from the Senate. While on the bench, Kevin presided over more than 4,000 civil and criminal cases. In 2017, he resigned from the federal branch and is now a lead attorney at Sanford, Heisler, and Sharp in Tennessee. Before beginning his journey of over 30 years in the litigation world as a judge and attorney, Kevin honorably served in the United States Navy as a petty officer with Patrol Squadron 17. Kevin recently worked with Kim Kardashian to help secure executive clemency for Chris Young, a young man Kevin was required to sentence to life in prison for a non-violent drug offense due to a draconian mandatory minimum sentence law. In 2021, President Trump commuted Mr. Young's sentence to time served, and Kevin was at the airport to greet Young on his return to Nashville. It was during this time that Willie Nelson's ex-wife, Connie, helped to get documents about Leonard Peltier's case into the hands of Judge Sharp. Since 2019, he has led a nationwide push to secure presidential clemency for Leonard Peltier, a 77-year-old Native American civil rights activist wrongly convicted in federal court and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms for the killing of 2 FBI agents at the Pine Ridge Reservation on June 26, 1975. Although Peltier was initially convicted of first-degree murder, that conviction was later vacated, but his prison sentence was upheld for aiding and abetting a murder. The U.S. Attorney's Office has since admitted it doesn't know who killed the agents, yet Leonard is still incarcerated and in failing health. Judge Sharp, I want to thank you for your service to the country. I want to thank you for your lifelong service towards seeking justice. And I want to thank you for coming here today to talk about Leonard Peltier's case and what we can all do to see him freed after nearly a half century of wrongful imprisonment.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, George. It's such an important issue. And this is really about the Constitution for me. I took an oath when I joined the Navy to support and defend the Constitution. When I went to law school and you passed the bar, you were sworn in as a member of the bar. You, again, take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. When I went to work for Congress, I took an oath to support and defend the United States Constitution. And then when I took the bench in 2011, I took that oath again to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that's why this case is so important to me. And it's why Chris Young's case was so important to me that you mentioned earlier, right? When I took the bench, I'd been mostly a civil rights lawyer, had little criminal law experience. And the criminal law is not complicated, but it's hard. And it's hard not because the law is so difficult to understand, but it's hard because there are people involved and liberties involved. Unlike a civil case where, someone's arguing over who owns the royalties to a piece of intellectual property.
Right.
Okay, that's money. And we can make those rulings. Nobody's going to live or die based on what happens there. But in the criminal system, these are people's lives, and there's nothing more important than liberty. And that's why Leonard's case is so important, and it's why Chris Young's case was so important. It was the catalyst for me leaving the bench when I had to sentence Mr. Young, who was only 23 years old at the time, to a life sentence for a nonviolent drug offense. It was a third strike, and his first 2 strikes at the ages of 19 and 20 were, they were drug charges, drug convictions, but for minimal quantities. It's like he wasn't some big, international drug dealer.
Right.
He was a kid on the street with combined weights of strikes 1 and 2 being less than the weight of a quarter, the coin, not like a quarter of a kilo or,
Wow.
It was a quarter. It was nothing, but those were strikes 1 and 2. And so when he was convicted on the third strike, then he ended up with a mandatory life sentence. And that was, it was unbelievable to me that this is how the criminal justice system was going to work. There was not much justice in that system. And I ended up ultimately stepping down from the bench after coming to this conclusion that was I more valuable to society on the bench complaining on these one-offs where I had to send people to prison for excessively harsh sentences and long sentences? Or was I more valuable to society stepping down and talking about these issues? And ultimately, I don't know that I would have decided to step down, but for Sanford Heisler, this firm out of New York that said, we want you. They're great civil rights lawyers. We want you to come here, and we're going to give you the platform and the ability to talk about these issues. At this time, I had not met Leonard Peltier. I stepped down and start working on clemency for Chris Young. It results in a meeting with President Trump in the Oval Office with Kim Kardashian and Van Jones and Ivanka and Jared, and we all talk about clemency process in general, criminal justice reform in general, because at that time, the latest, and now I'm blanking on the name, now I'm blanking on the name of the act that had not been signed. So it's going to come to me in like 5 minutes. I can't believe I'm blanking on this important piece of legislation.
You've got a lot going on in your mind, so it's okay. It's okay. Understand.
And so we were ultimately able to secure clemency for Chris Young. But during that period, that story of the meeting with Kardashian at the White House, it explodes. Nobody cares as much or cares at all that some judge from Tennessee is in this meeting. What they care about is Kim Kardashian is in this meeting. And that's the story. And that then, kind of through TMZ and other entertainment outlets is splashed across the media. And that's where Connie Nelson, Willie's ex-wife, sees this story and says, well, wait a minute, maybe after all these decades, this is someone who can help free Leonard. So at that time, I had just stepped down. The story of Chris Young was out, and I was getting flooded with letters from prisoners or family members of prisoners. Please help. I didn't do it. I'm innocent. Help me. And some of them are, and some of them weren't, and some of them didn't tell me enough to even guess at whether or not there was anything to this case, but it was just flooded with them. And one day this package comes in, and the way I worked this, there were so many letters would come in that I would stack them up and then just read them at the end of the week, because it would eat up my day to go through. The mail would come in each day to sit down and take these, and so I kind of had to organize it. And this larger package comes in. I can tell that it's prisoner-related mail. I don't know what it's about, but I can tell it's prisoner-related mail. And I asked someone in the office, just put it in the stack and I'll get to it on Friday. And I hand it to her. And then I take a couple of steps and I turn back around and I go, hand me that one. Let me get that one back. Bring that back. It just felt different. There was something about that felt different. And so I took the package and I went to my office. I sat down at my desk and I opened it. And then 1 hour passes, 2 hours pass, 4 hours pass, 8 hours pass. My whole day is eaten up with reviewing all of this material. And it's trial transcripts, and it's court opinions, and it's newspaper articles, and it's, pictures of artwork by Leonard. And I wasn't that familiar with it. And when the incident happened, 12 years old, I don't remember that. I'm a kid in Memphis, Tennessee in the summer of 75. I'm playing Little League baseball. I have no idea what's happening, in South Dakota or, anywhere west of the Mississippi. I don't know what's going on out there. I'm playing baseball. Sure. So I have this vague recollection of something like that happening and maybe been on the news, but even now, as I think about it, I may be misremembering it altogether. And what I really remember is Wounded Knee, which would have been a much bigger national story in 73. So I really don't know anything about this. I look at all of this with fresh eyes, but with eyes of a former federal judge. I'm not an advocate. I'm not a lawyer who takes on these cases. I took Chris's case because it was important to me, and I needed to step down and take that on. But, I'm not out looking for cases. And so I'm just reading this as a federal judge would read this. And I'm stunned by what I'm reading. And I'm stunned by what's happening. And I'm stunned by the blatant misconduct of the U.S. Attorney's Office and the blatant misconduct misfeasance and malfeasance of the FBI and the other federal law enforcement, or the other federal agencies with law enforcement responsibilities out there. It just is stunning to me, because they took the same oath I did. Right? We took this oath to support and defend the Constitution. And I'm reading this, and there's not much question about it. It's not like I'm throwing in some, information that's not just right there on the page. And that's what stuns me. And I'm outraged at what I'm reading. And so that's what kind of leads me to, all right, I've got to get in touch with this woman and go, okay, look, if Leonard wants me to take this case on, I'm in. This is the what happened is open and obvious.
What was that next step of how you actually decided? Because I'm sure you were pulled to it. You had this connection at this point, and then how did you go about then saying, I'm going to take this case?
Well, first I went to my partners because I know it's going to be a big commitment in time and resources, and I can't do it alone. This is a case that had been around for 40 plus years. Right, Kevin Sharp sitting at his desk in Nashville is not going to be able to, wave a magic wand. This is going to take a lot of people and a lot of time. And so I went to my partners and said, "Here's what's come in the mail. Let me give you my thumbnail sketch of this and ask, does anyone have any issues with me diving into this and bringing others with me?" And it was absolutely not. You have to do this. And so, there have been so many people, it's not just me, they're just lawyer after lawyer and staff people who've been great about this, who've all jumped in and want to help. The what was really easy.
Right.
What became complicated, mostly because I was a white guy from Tennessee who knew almost nothing, if you were relying on our education system in this country, almost nothing about the history of Native Americans. It was the why that really sucked me into this case. And maybe on the what, I'm being a little too flippant about it. To me, it was obvious, but that was because of my background. And I'm sure that there was others who might look at that and go, well, it's not so obvious to me. But I saw that so early and it was so clear. It was like, okay, what are we talking about here? Why was this ever taken to trial? Two, how was it moved around like this from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, knowing something about the federal judicial system? How the hell did that happen? Who's doing that? And I still haven't been able to figure out, where those orders came from to move this case. But the what was easy. The why then just sucked me in, and it was and has been this multi-year journey, and one that will continue. I'm sure long after I am no longer involved with this case, to figure out the history of this relationship between the Native community, the indigenous peoples, and the United States government. And you can't understand what happened on June 26, 1975 at Pine Ridge without understanding Wounded Knee in 73 and, Wounded Knee in 1890 and Alcatraz, in the 1960s, and all the trail of broken treaties and the takeover of the BIA building. All of those things play into why this happened. This wasn't some random act out there. It was a culmination of events that had transpired over hundreds of years that were of the United States government's own making.
Yep.
And I'm still digesting that because it's so hard to understand. And there's so much of it's new. Right? If I'm talking to somebody out at Pine Ridge, they're going, well, We all understand that because it's part of our history, whether written or oral, for generations. I'm the new guy. I'm the Johnny come lately to this. Once you learn in school about the one trail of tears, not the multiple trails that happened out there, but the one that we all know about, it's kind of over. There's your history lesson.
Yeah, that was your 2 pages in the book.
Yeah, maybe you got 2 pages.
If that, yeah.
Maybe it was 2 paragraphs.
Just being generous.
Yeah, right. That's it. And then it's, you just kind of wade through this, and each turn of the new page, or speaking to someone who was there, or reading a book, this book I Will by Sharon Leonard, is a fantastic history of 4 founding members of AIM and kind of how they got there and what led them to that point, and their own childhoods that were created because of the childhoods of their parents. And that's the first time that I learned a little something about boarding schools, which again, Leonard and his sister were kidnapped.
Yep.
He was 9, she was 6. They're kidnapped. I don't know what other term you use for that.
That's what it was.
That's what it was. And I didn't understand the full implications of that until the Canadian government starts to finally acknowledge their own boarding school system. And then we have, fortunately, a Secretary of the Interior who put together a committee and said, let's find out about what was happening here. Although they know it. They know what the answers are. But that was enough that right, you can't understand what happened on June 25th or June 26, 1975, unless you also understand the boarding school system.
Sure.
Because Leonard was a victim of those boarding schools, but so was Dick Wilson, the leader of the Goon Squad. And I'm jumping around a little bit here, but for those people who are familiar with the story and the reign of terror and the internal conflict that was going on within the tribal communities there, Dick Wilson and the Goon Squad, the guardians of the Oglala Nation, that they called themselves, the self-described Goon Squad, right? That led up to this immediate conflict. But again, it's easy to just kind of label Dick Wilson as a bad guy. And look, there were a lot of terrible things happening there, but I've started to try to understand Wilson as well, who was also a victim of these boarding schools. He took that trauma and channeled it. I think this is Sharp being armchair psychologist, but channeled it into what would become the Goon Squad. Dennis Banks and Leonard and those guys channeled that trauma into what would become AIM. And the government gets involved in that internal dispute. And it's in some similar ways, it's similar to Vietnam. They pick sides. They pick the side that's most beneficial to the government, the side that's going to sell them, land rights and mineral rights and these kind of things. But they pick that side, and they don't investigate murders, right? They become part of the problem. That escalates this conflict. People are dying out there. The FBI is not investigating those. They don't have to, because they know.
To put a number on that, there was over 60 uninvestigated murders of traditionalist and Native American Indians on that reservation. And I believe I heard a quote from the governor at the time that said there was more murders during that period of time on that reservation than the rest of the state combined.
Right. And that's just the murders, the assaults that were taking place. And, I've talked to people there at the time who just said, you couldn't send your kids to the grocery store. You always had to keep your head on a swivel, just to make sure you didn't get shot or attacked, or the people who were assaulted just on the highways running through there. This place was chaos. And instead of stopping that, which the law enforcement should have done, they fueled it. And that's what brought AIM and Leonard and Robideau and Butler and brought those people to Pine Ridge to begin with. When the government wouldn't step in and do it and protect the traditionals, AIM did, and they were invited there, and that's what was happening. And so, was anybody surprised by this? Probably only, I don't know. Some of the people on the fringe may have been surprised by this, but everyone knew that the place was a powder keg.
It was.
And this was inevitable.
So if you can walk me through the events of June 26th, and I'll kind of come in and give some commentary as well too, but what happened on the morning of June 26th, and how did this incident at Oglala occur?
Well, the straightforward part is that you have these two agents, young agents, who have come in from another city because, right, don't forget that this area had minimal federal law enforcement. Right. It escalates, and they increase these numbers tenfold, 20-fold in such a short period of time, right, which then creates its own level of hostilities.
Sure.
So you've got these two agents who purport to be looking for a young man named Jimmy Eagle for stealing a pair of cowboy boots. Now, they'd have to be really expensive cowboy boots, or you don't even have federal jurisdiction. So right. What are you doing, right? You don't. The feds don't have jurisdiction over anything and everything that happens on tribal lands, only certain things. And so I'm not sure they have jurisdiction, but assume they do.
Okay.
Assume that they could go and arrest young Jimmy Eagle for stealing a pair of cowboy boots. What are you doing? You know that this place is a powder keg. You know that the person you are looking for hasn't done anything serious. You know that you can't just, drive into this reservation like this. And in fact, there were, according to more senior people with the FBI who were there at the time, they say, well, there were protocols. They violated our own internal rules and should not have gone up there. Well, I question whether or not that was true, or why were they really doing this? And I don't know. I can speculate as to that, but we do know they went in there. They radioed in. This was before everything was recorded, so it's transcribed, but the transcriptions tell you that they radioed in, said they were following a truck, a red pickup truck that fit the description of the truck owned by Jimmy Eagle, who was wanted for these cowboy boot thievery. Now, they're in plain clothes and unmarked cars. We also know that the goon squad and the traditionals have and as you mentioned earlier, there have been 60 murders in this area over the few years leading up to this, right? Again, I keep saying this, but it's the best term. It was a powder keg.
Yeah.
That everybody was on edge for good reason. And so when unmarked cars, plainclothes, officers come onto the reservation, the people up at Jumping Bull Ranch, where AIM is and where the traditionals are, have gathered and are being protected. They don't know who these people are, right? Are these goon squad? I don't know. They didn't come up, flashing lights or giving the signal that they are one of us. So we know they are not one of us. And that means they are likely hostile. And they're seem to be following this red pickup truck, which ultimately stops. And that's where the shooting begins. No one knows who fired first, why, what was going on. They've radioed in and said we are now in a firefight with these guys. But who they are, we don't know. We do know who they weren't. We know that it wasn't Leonard Peltier because Leonard Peltier was up at the Jumping Bull Ranch. We know that because the three boys who initially testified, one of whom was Norman Patrick Brown, 15, 16 years old at the time, testified that they saw Leonard going down the hill, but that was all coerced testimony. What we know to be the truth was that the shooting had started and Leonard is up the hill. and he is talking to these boys to get them to get the women and children to safety, right? So he's down there starting this firefight. He's up the hill trying to
protect his people
and protect people and organize them and make sure they get out of there. So we know it wasn't Leonard. Now, interestingly, you mentioned this, and this is the government's position, that they don't know who shot the agents. But in some ways, and I've said that myself, right? They don't know who did it. They know it wasn't Leonard. But I think they do know who did it because there was a trial, right? And now I'm jumping ahead, but Robideau and Butler were tried for this, and they were acquitted based on self-defense. So it means that there was a killing, but it wasn't murder. There was a homicide, which is the killing of anybody, but it's not illegal because it was in self-defense. And so if they didn't commit a crime, who did Leonard aid and abet?
And I think it's important to just point out real quick that they had their trial, and if Leonard was tried with them, he would have had the same result of self-defense. Right. So we can kind of get into why he wasn't there, because at the time he was fighting extradition charges in Canada, not feeling like he would get a fair trial, go figure. But that I just wanted to kind of point that out because it's an important fact of his timeline and theirs as well.
Well, and and going back to the shootout itself, the firing starts, but it's the other interesting, and this is all pure speculation, but how in the hell did you get so many federal agents and civilian militia there, 100 plus? How in such a short amount of time do you mobilize that group?
I've been on that reservation. I know what the roads are like. I know how far it is to your major city or rapid city. I know how difficult it is to organize and get, I think it was 178 paramilitarily trained agents or whatever the number was, and some documents I had read there in like an hour, like whatever it was almost impossible unless there was some knowledge that you needed to get them ready to send ahead of time.
They are ready, right? When I was in the Navy, we would stay on what we called the ready alert. We're not flying, but we all stayed together in the event that the Russians moved their submarines, the Soviets moved a submarine, that we were ready to launch.
Yeah.
Couldn't do that if we're all scattered about.
Right. You're on call.
We're on call, and being together and getting in the air in an hour or less is really hard to do. I can't imagine without having them all ready to go and on their own ready alert that you can gather together 150 plus agents and get them there in that amount of time. But again, that's all. It's speculating. The circumstantial evidence tells me this smells fishy.
Sure.
But look, you're there, and there's this shootout. But they caused it. They cannot absolve themselves of their own responsibility for what happened there. And again, as we talked about earlier, that event didn't happen in a vacuum. That event happened because of all of the things that had preceded it in the days, years, months, decades, centuries before that led us here. And so, there we are. Now, ultimately, the group escaped. One young man, Joe Stuntz, was killed. Kohler and Williams were also killed. So 3 people were killed that day. And in spite of having, 100 plus agents, 100, 200 agents, a significant group of AIM members escaped. And they got out. Ultimately, you alluded to it earlier, Leonard made his way to Canada, fearing that he would not get a fair trial. He was absolutely right. And Robideau and Butler were tried. They went ahead. The judge said, we want to go ahead and put them on trial. The case had been transferred out of South Dakota to North Dakota and Judge McManus because, the judge that had it, South Dakota, fearing that they would not get a fair trial, asked one of his buddies to take it. But then, the judge that tries Robideau and Butler has no idea why the third defendant Initially, Jimmy Eagle had also been indicted, but the indictment was dropped for lack of evidence. So the way criminal cases work, when you have multiple defendants, this is important. And one of the things that really kind of bothered me about how Leonard's case gets transferred to yet another judge in Fargo is that a case will, if they're all related, they are tried at least through, they may be physically tried separately, but the same judge will have the case. And so it'll have, the docket number may be, 1 -CR for criminal, -1000 for the case number, -1, -2, -3 for your 3 defendants. But they all stay together. They're counted as 3 separate cases, but they stay together. It would be very unusual, and I never saw this happen, for one of those defendants to not only be carved out, that's not so unusual. The judge might try them all separately,
right,
but sent to another city with another judge. That, to me, I've never heard of, and particularly done without an order. There appears to be no order anywhere. Now, a court of appeals, which has responsibility over the district courts, right? That's the way the system works. Trial courts are district courts, circuit courts are appellate courts, and then you go to the Supreme Court. The circuit court or appellate court has supervisory responsibility over the district courts. And so on occasion, they might reach down and take a case from a district court judge. Sometimes they'll do that for health reasons, right? Someone's got some issues, or occasionally what will happen is the judge and the lawyers will get so contentious that the Court of Appeals says, right, this defendant cannot get a fair trial. We're going to move it. But you keep it within the same circuit or within the same district. But you certainly have an order doing that. They just don't get up and, walk to a different judge themselves.
Yeah, there's reasoning behind it. Sure.
There's a reason to do it, and there has to be an order. There's paperwork for everything. If nothing else, the government knows how to do paperwork. And there's paperwork that explains it. That I have not found. What I have found are notes from the FBI showing that they spoke to the judge before the case was transferred, as did the U.S. Attorney's Office, about Leonard's case. Now, it's not ex parte because he doesn't have the case yet, right? It would be really improper for him to do that and not have Leonard's counsel there if he had the case, but he doesn't have the case. So, but what are you doing? Talking to the prosecutor and the investigators about this case before it's transferred to you. We know what they were doing. We know what they were talking about. But once it's transferred, right, you've got a massive conflict. You got to step out of this thing. And none of that was done, right? Because there was never an intent to give Leonard a fair trial, because Robideau and Butler are tried separately from Leonard because he's in Canada, and they are acquitted based on self-defense. Because, as one of the jurors said, we were more afraid of the FBI. Hearing all of this evidence, we were more afraid of the FBI than we were of these people. And well, there was a great question that was asked of one of the FBI agents that, look, if you didn't know who they were, but you saw this threat coming up your driveway, you're going to defend yourself, right? And he said, yes. So, right, it was clear that the jury came to the right conclusion that they should be acquitted based on self-defense, but it does mean that they shot them. And so if they're acquitted based on self-defense, then there was no crime. And if there was no crime, how did Leonard get convicted of aiding and abetting? All of that comes because of all the misconduct that ultimately comes home to roost during the appellate process, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has to change their theory of the case that Leonard shot them at point blank range to he was there. And that became their theory. And the law was different at that time than it is today. Today, if that happened, the same set of circumstances happened today, there's no way that Leonard's conviction stands.
Right.
Because when they held the exculpatory evidence, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but so two things happened. Let's back up and talk about Leonard being extradited from Canada. The Canadian government judiciary will not extradite Leonard because there's no proof that he shot these agents. And so they need proof. And they find that in the form of the affidavit from Myrtle Pourbaix, coerced, as the U.S. attorney said at the time, once they were caught, not a scintilla of truth in this. Well, he knew that when they filed it with the Canadian government. They knew there was never a scintilla of truth in that Myrtle Pourbaix, who signed an affidavit that she says they wrote and handed to her and said, sign this or we're going to take your daughter away from you.
Well, there's like 3 affidavits.
There are 3 affidavits. Each one, the first one's not good enough. Here, let's give us another one.
Right.
He told me about it. Well, that's not good enough. Let's sign another one. Well, I was there, but I didn't see it. Oh, wait, I was there and I saw it. Each one gets more detailed and contradictory to the ones before.
Right.
And the thing that I know, again, as having been a federal judge who approved subpoenas and approved wiretaps and, worked with federal law enforcement, who I found to be really, in my district, people who were trying to do their job. And did it in a way that was open to me so that I could approve what they were doing and understand what they were doing. But what I know is that those affidavits are not drafted up by, the people who sign them. Those affidavits are drafted by the U.S. Attorney's Office with the help of the FBI. But, once it came to light that this affidavit was a complete fabrication, and that she had been coerced into it, Holtman, the U.S. attorney at the time, blamed it on what he called her FBI controllers. Right. So, right. I know how this works. That's not what happens. The U.S. attorney's office is involved in that. He knew that those were lies when they submitted them. But nevertheless, the Canadian government and the rest of us don't learn that until after Leonard's extradited and after the case is transferred to Fargo and after it's put in front of a judge who's a former U.S. attorney and after he had met with the U.S. attorney who was prosecuting the case and after he had met with the FBI who was prosecuting the case. And then that judge then says, well, look, the FBI is not on trial here. We're not going to let this case be tried in the way that the earlier case was that resulted in a self-defense verdict. I'm going to exclude all of that. And I'm not going to let these young boys testify that they were coerced into their earlier false testimony, that perjury. And I'm not going to let anybody talk about the misconduct of the FBI. And we don't even know about the ballistics test that shows it was not Leonard's weapon that killed them. They are still going to try this case on the theory that Leonard killed these 2 agents, and they got one piece of evidence, and that evidence is a shell casing. And the ballistics expert testifies that, this is not the best test in the world. Firing pin test would have been the best test to do, but we couldn't do a firing pin test, which turned out to not be true. That was not true. They had done a firing pin test and it showed that it wasn't Leonard's weapon, but we don't learn that until much later. And that's where the change in the law makes this a completely different case, because once that's discovered and once the U.S. Attorney's Office says, well, we don't know who shot the agents, although if they admitted or took the position that it was Robideau or Butler, which the judge would not let that evidence that they were acquitted come into Leonard's trial. So they had to say, we don't know who did it, because now we've got an empty chair and we can say he aided and abetted this unknown person or persons. So when that comes before the Court of Appeals, the standard of review is, well, if that evidence had been presented, would the jury probably have come to a different conclusion? And the court said, we can't say that they probably would have come to a different conclusion. They possibly could have. That's not the standard today. Today, if that happens, the standard is, was the defendant deprived of a fair trial?
Yes.
By the hiding of this evidence? And that is so easy to answer. Of course he was. Of course he was. But when the law changed in that that review, it wasn't retroactive. And so you can't go back and say, well, wait a minute, that's not the standard you applied to Leonard. Let's retry that case. And as we've learned recently, innocence really doesn't matter. You've got the Supreme Court saying, well, look, yeah, the guy may be innocent. This is the death penalty case they just ruled on. He may be innocent, but we've got to end these things at some point. There has to be a finality. We're not going to keep the case open just because somebody might be innocent. This is not justice. Where's the justice in all of this? So that piece doesn't help Leonard. The other thing that came out, and I'd never seen this written before, but I'm reading the trial transcript from Leonard's trial, and on day 2, 3 individuals show up in the courtroom. They have nothing to do with the case. They're 3 women who work at a local company there, and they come to the courthouse and they hand a handwritten note that they have all signed and it's been notarized. And it says, "We work with one of your jurors, and she is prejudiced against Indians, and we can't live with ourselves if we don't at least bring it to your attention." Court says, well, wait a minute, let's bring these 3 people in here. And he talks to them separately. Each one comes into the courtroom. They, take a seat, and they each tell a very similar story. We work with one of your jurors named Clock, and she told us that she may be called to sit on this jury and that she is prejudiced against Indians. Next person comes in and says essentially the same thing. Next person comes in and says the same thing. Then it's the judge says, well, okay, well, let's talk to Ms. Clock. Let's get the juror in here. And she comes in and he just says this. And I'm telling you this story at about the time frame that it took for them to deal with her admitted prejudice. So he calls her in and says, I want you to respond to this piece of paper here. And you think that she's either going to say, well, they misunderstood me, or absolutely not, I never said such a thing. And instead she goes, yeah, I said that. That's true. And then the judge says, okay, anybody
go back to your seat?
Yeah, right. Anybody got any questions for her? Leonard's lawyers say, well, you understand this is a really important case. Yeah. And you can be fair, right? Yeah. And then says, okay, she's all right with us. And the U.S. Attorney's Office says, we don't have any questions. I mean, I almost described for you verbatim what happened that day. And then as I'm reading the transcript, I turned to the back going, surely somewhere along the way, she gets excluded. Initially, I go to the next day thinking, because it was at the end of day 2. So I go to the transcript that started day 3 thinking,
I'll see a new juror name.
Yeah, let's see who they're going to exclude her. What's happening here? And instead, I read through it and I don't see them deal with it. And I go back and read it again. And then I realize they did deal with it. Here's what they did. The U.S. attorney said, Judge, that thing we talked about yesterday, we've come to an agreement on that. She's okay. And that's it. Then I realized that thing they talked about yesterday was a juror who admitted that she is prejudiced against Indians. And you've got a murder case where the defendant is an Indian. Leonard's lawyer says, well, Judge, if we exclude her, then an alternate will have to take her place, and that'll only leave us with one alternate. And, if something happens, then we'll have a mistrial. And I'm reading that thinking, yes, congratulations. It's the second best thing that can happen to you after an acquittal, a mistrial, and try it again. This made no sense to me. So here's the other thing that's changed, though, right? At that time, they had waived that issue of a prejudiced juror on appeal because Leonard's lawyers waived it. They said she was okay with them. We cannot waive that today. The issues of juror bias, we now understand, are so important that it's not waivable. It is just a per se ineffective assistance of counsel, and you would get a new trial. But again, the law has changed. It
was different then.
So, here we are, and Leonard ends up getting convicted. They go through the appeals. We find the hidden exculpatory evidence. It's called Brady evidence that's been hidden all this time. Should have resulted in a new trial. but it was not. And, here we are for almost 5 decades later. And the U.S. attorney who took over the case. So the case is tried in 1977. Carter wins the presidency in 1976. But although it's tried in 1977, the Nixon or Ford, I'm not sure who appointed him, but the Republican appointee was still in office and hadn't been replaced yet. James Reynolds comes on as the Carter appointee, but he is there early. So he's there for post-trial motions, and he's there for the appeals, and he's there for the habeas appeals. Since that time, James Reynolds last summer, came out with a very strong letter to President Biden. That's, where he falls on his sword and says, we did things that were improper. This man needs to be released. You need to grant clemency here. And you had the judge, Heaney, who had the case on appeal back when they ruled that Leonard's conviction could not be overturned. But before Gerald Heaney died, he came out and said the same thing. It is time for clemency. And that was back in the 90s, and here we are in 2021, and the U.S. attorney saying it's time for clemency. When does this end? I didn't look at this as some kind of hired gun. I looked at this case as an objective member or former member of the federal judiciary whose life really since high school has been dedicated to this country and this Constitution. I am here because the Constitution demands that Leonard be granted clemency. And, it doesn't seem complicated to me, but then that's where the people call Leonard a political prisoner. And that means different things to different people. But I think what's easy to see is that he is a prisoner of politics because he's now there after all these decades. Not because anyone thinks he did it. They don't. Not that any of this was proven. It wasn't. And in fact, what was shown was that he did not do it. Not that he aided and abetted anybody. You change your theory on appeal because his co-defendants were acquitted based on self-defense. He's there because of politics, because there is a constituency that influences the president and influenced Clinton and Obama and all the presidents in between, that says we may have the wrong guy, but we've got somebody. And it's one of those any Indian will do. Now, one of the interesting things that happened, and this was a perfect example of that any Indian will do, when Leonard has been eligible for parole over the years. Parole was abolished in the late 80s in the federal system to show how tough we are on crime. But Leonard and those people who had been sentenced while parole existed still are eligible for parole. So they go through this, theater of listening to his parole applications, and then they deny them. But in one of the denials, what happens in the federal parole system, there's a parole commission, and employees of the BOP, Bureau of Prisons, will act as hearing officers. And then they make a recommendation, and it goes up to the parole commission, who will either accept or reject that recommendation. Leonard, after it came out that the government was no longer saying that Leonard shot these agents, the hearing officer said, well, wait a minute. Now you've been in decades, and you now change your story and say he's not the guy who shot them. You don't know who shot them. And he recommended that Leonard be granted parole. Before that recommendation was acted upon by the parole commission, this man was terminated, and a new hearing officer was put in place. And it's reported that this hearing officer, and I've got this from a couple of different sources, the hearing officer said, well, you may not have done it, but someone in your tribe did. Parole recommends that parole is denied. What is this? Right now, let's change it. This is an African American. Well, you may not have done it, but some black guy did. Right? You hear it like that, and you go, well, oh my God.
Where's the justice?
Where's the justice? But that's exactly what he was doing. You didn't do it, but some Indian did. and any Indian will do. That was the piece he left off, but that's really what he was saying.
Sure.
Any Indian will do. And that's why we're here. And that's why it's so important, not just for Leonard. Leonard is an individual who deserves justice after all this time, but it's also important for the broader relationship with the Native people, right? It's time for this to end. It's time for the government to acknowledge their role in this. It's time to say, look, we got our pound of flesh, even if you believe that there was a murder in spite of what's happened already, and you know that he didn't have anything to do with it. You get your 50 years in this for not just Native Americans, though. You've got to end this for the rest of the country. And you really need to end this too for the FBI. The FBI needs this, right? They need to get past this, and they cannot. They will always be that FBI that committed these heinous acts so that they could get a conviction of any Indian, that they could get their hands on. They need this to end so that they can move on. The government in general, the United States government, needs this to end so that we can move forward. And I said move on, but it's really move forward. We're not going to move on and just forget that it ever happened. But we can't move forward unless we acknowledge what happened, unless we can talk about what happened. And I think President Biden has done a great job of that in other areas with Native communities, of acknowledging our past misconduct and our the past grievances, and then trying to work through them. You can't just forget it, but you got to work through it. And that's what that's why it's so important. He's important because he's a human being. He's important because he's a United States citizen. He's important because of what he means to the Constitution. And he's important to what he means to the Native people. It's time to end this. Everybody needs this to be over. The worst thing that can happen would be for Leonard to die in prison. And then it never ends. And we can never move forward. It'll always be hanging there. And that's a real danger because of his health.
Sure. And, I want to touch on the health there too, but I always think about when you hear about the great healing, all the wrongs and injustices that, have happened to the indigenous people here, the Native American Indians. And, we see it worldwide when people are coming in and colonializing areas and things too, but there is an opportunity. And, like you said, I see Biden has made some strides, and some other presidents have made some strides or acknowledgments to be able to help mend that and become a part of that great healing again. And that I feel like this is such a huge piece of that circle of healing, and for all the reasons you just described. And I like the time is now. It feels like, it really does feel like it needs to happen, because we see Leonard's 77 years old and he's in failing health. I know that he just went through COVID, which was devastating for him. If you could talk to me about some of his health issues that are going on in prison, and the lack of adequate medical care in the prison industry.
Well, right. I mean, globally, the Bureau of Prisons is not set up for healthcare, right? It's not what they do, and they don't want to do that, right? It's that culture that's in there, but it's also just not set up for that. It's not why the Bureau of Prisons exists. So healthcare there stinks. And then you put vulnerable people into this environment, and then watch them age, right? So you still have a couple of thousand prisoners who are called old law prisoners, pre-parole. So they're all going to be, the young ones are going to be in their 60s. So you've got these health issues that come with age, but then you put that into, someone who's aging into an environment that is not healthy. And then COVID comes, and now you've got this breeding ground for this virus, and vulnerable people. And so, Leonard's got heart issues. Leonard's got diabetes. Leonard had at one point lockjaw. So he's got these continuing problems with his jaw. He's got some arthritis issues developing. And then you put COVID on top of that. All of his health issues are in these categories that the CDC would say, right, this is a recipe for disaster if you get COVID.
Sure.
Now let's put this environment where COVID is breeding out of control, and then he gets COVID. And what are they going to do for it? Well, they just move him to another cell, not a medical unit. They just move him to an isolation cell, and they check his temperature every day. I mean, he lived. He's still feeling the effects of COVID. And at that time, he did not have a booster. And I'm trying to figure out, how do we get this man a booster, because he fits into the category of people who need booster shots.
Absolutely.
Kid you not, becomes like this kind of catch-22 scene where I'm told, well, you have to ask for it. Okay, who do we ask? What's the protocol so that I can ask for it? We can't tell you that. Well, then how do I ask for it if you won't tell me how to ask for it? There was another incident very similar to that happened while I'm trying to get information about Leonard. He's been moved, but nobody will talk to me about what's his health condition. And nobody will, and sometimes won't answer the phone. There was one day I called 24 times trying to get someone to answer the phone. And on occasion, maybe 3-4 times, they would pick the phone up, and then I could hear them, and they drop it, and they drop it. I call right back. They pick it up, they hold it, and then they drop it. And at one point, I get a hold of somebody, and I said, okay, look, I need to talk to his counselor. Counselor's out today. I go, okay, let me talk to his case manager. Case manager's out today. Let me talk to the case manager's supervisor. He's out today. I go, okay, well, I'd like to talk to the assistant warden. You can't talk to the assistant warden unless it's authorized by the counselor, the case manager, or the case manager's supervisor. And I said, well, they're out. So what happens if the person that I need to talk to is not there? And he said, I'm not at liberty to disclose that. And I go, I'm not asking for their home telephone numbers.
Right.
I'm just asking, who do I talk to so that I can talk to the assistant warden? And then the guy said, I told you I can't tell you that. And he hung up on me. It's like, what? This is like the scene from Catch-22 where they're talking about Major. You can only see him when he's not there. What? So this is the kind of, it's like this some kind of British comedy of government dysfunction,
which has happened for decades. This is your experience, but I mean, I know of other folks who've been working in this case, and for my involvement since 2000, I mean, I've heard stories like this many a times where you're like, how is this possible?
Right. It's just, it's the way it works. And then you can't take that organization and go, okay, now take care of a very sick old man. Now take care of a very sick old man who just got a disease that could kill him, who's contracted a virus that could kill him. Now he's gotten through it himself. There were days he went, so they put him in the isolation cell. And his water now is the sink that's in there, but the sink is not clean water. It's rusty and opaque, and he has no cup anyway. So he's got to drink it out of his hands, which are not going to be clean. About 4 days in, he finally gets a cup, and he uses that to run hot water, lets the water get real as hot as he can, and lets the sediment settle to the bottom, and he drinks the clean water off the top. That's his water. For food, he's given a little packet of peanut butter, but he's not giving a way to get into it, right? You just got to kind of tear it. He's also got bad teeth.
Oh, yeah.
So he can't just, rip this thing off like we would. And so he's kind of spends his time struggling with a packet of peanut butter and a piece of bread that you then, if you can get it open, you just kind of squeeze it onto the bread. And it took, I think, about 8 days before they gave him a spoon. But I couldn't get any information out of BOP. And when I spoke to Leonard after he got out, I go, well, so what was they told me you were in a medical unit. What were they doing to monitor you? He said, once a day, somebody would check my temperature. Right? Has anybody put an oximeter on you? Do they know what
right?
Nope. They checked my temperature, and gave me peanut butter and a piece of bread. So right? Something like that could kill him. You've got to get him out, and he's not over it, right? You're not out of danger.
Right.
People are COVID again, and when you put it in an environment like that, right, where everybody's using the same telephones, and
it's a breeding grounds.
It is a breeding ground. So it's just a matter of time. And can he survive that? I don't know. The worst thing that can happen, though, for all of us is for Leonard to die in prison. Then we can never move forward. It's a snapshot, and we're frozen in time and cannot move if he dies in prison. He's got to get out.
So what do you feel is the most important, impactful move for us as individual citizens who believe and want to fight for justice and see a man that should be freed return to his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren? And what do you feel is the avenue that you're working with and the International Leonard Peltier Defense Committee to see that we actually see Leonard Peltier freed soon?
Well, that's the $64,000 question here on what can we do to get him out. All the legal avenues have been exhausted, right? The law has changed, but he cannot take advantage of those laws. So we're now down to the president, and the president has the absolute authority to grant clemency. He can sign the piece of paper and let Leonard out tomorrow. But again, it's back, we talked about this earlier, he's a prisoner of politics, and politics live and die with constituents. Who cares about this issue? Right? That's what the White House, that's the analysis they're doing. That's the calculus they're doing. Who cares about this? And that's why writing to the White House, calling the White House, there are people there who will answer the phone and say, how can I help you? And you can tell them. There's an email system. You can go to their website and leave messages, write letters, flood them with handwritten notes. I know that's a lot of trouble, but even a short note that says, Mr. President, it is time to free Leonard Peltier. The White House needs to know that people care. They need to know there's a constituency out there that you can also write to, and this should be to all three of them, write, call, email your members of Congress and the Senate. You can write to the members of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee. Write to members of the Judiciary Committee in the House and the Senate. They need to know that people care about this because it's back to politics. Senator Leahy came out and said it's time to end this. Senator Schatz, who chairs the Indian Affairs Committee, has said to the president, it's time to end this. Senator Hirono, who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, has said it's time to end this, Mr. President. Representative Grijalva, and I can go through, there's about a dozen other members of the House, important members of the House have said to the president, it's time to end this. Those are all part of the president's constituency. It's us as individuals. It's individual members of the House and Senate. It's the House and Senate collectively. It's agencies. We are all constituents that the White House cares about. But if they don't hear from you, they don't know that you care. And that's why you got to hear from people. That's why it's so important. You can't just say, man, they really ought to free Leonard Peltier. You got to say it to somebody with the authority to correct that. And that's the White House, and that's members of the House and Senate. And that's, it's any of your organizations that come together as an organization, the tribes of all across the country in the NCAI, National Congress of American Indians, resolution after resolution to say, Mr. President, free Leonard Peltier. People have to hear your voice. And if they don't hear your voice, then what's the point of supporting freedom for Leonard if nobody knows it? So let them hear from you. That's the most important thing that can be done, and it will work.
And I believe it is. I feel like the time is now. I think the place is here, and I'll be putting in links. As soon as we're done with the discussion, there's going to be some folks who have come on, some celebrities, some musicians, artists that we have messages from them for President Biden, and also to try to get as many people who are listening to this and who are familiar with Leonard's case to get out there and flood social media. Have these letter, email campaigns, phone calls, everything that we can do in every single avenue because I find that this time is absolutely the most valuable time for Leonard, and we need to get him out immediately. His health care it's horrible, the conditions he lives in. And I feel like it's, he needs to be back with his people and with his family. And
the time is now. You're right. It feels different. And here's one of the things. What's being said about Leonard is not new, right? We've known for decades about the misconduct from the U.S. Attorney's Office and the law enforcement, federal law enforcement in the area at that time. This is not new, but now I get the sense that people are willing to listen, right? The ears are open. People are open to hear these things, to talk about the misconduct of human beings, right? The agents are just humans.
Sure.
People who work in the U.S. Attorney's Office are fallible and they do bad things, and that's what happened. But also people are willing to open up and be receptive to hearing about the misconduct towards the natives and towards the indigenous people by the United States government. And boarding schools are a perfect example of that, which Leonard was a victim of. Hearts and minds are open to hear this now. And that's why this window is here. And it's important because I don't know when this window will close again, but there's a moment here where Native American voices are being heard, and voices of not just Native Americans, but of any average citizen to talk about these issues. They are being heard. I think this administration is hearing them. So, how long is this window gonna stay open? I don't know, but it's open right now, and it is time for Leonard to go home. And you said it, right? He's got grandkids and great grandkids, and there are people who want to take him in. His tribe, the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, have said, we have a place for him. He is an elder in our tribe. We want him home, and we're going to take care of him. It's time, President Biden. It's time.
It is. I want to thank you so much for all your hard work with Leonard's case, and so much that you've done on behalf of this country, and what you've served, and really trying to seek out true justice here. You're an inspiration for many people, and I will continue to be in touch and in support any way that I can for Leonard. And, I definitely want to just thank you for everything that you've done and that you continue to do. Someone's picked up the good fight, and I'm glad it's you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think one of the things you touched on is the reason that I'm passionate about this is because I love this country. Mm-hmm. And that's who we are. And whenever we veer away from that, we've got to come back to it. We've got to come back to a Constitution that protects us, and a Constitution that guides us. And when we get away from that, because we're people, and we will, we've got to come back. We've got to be able to talk about it. And that's what makes this country so great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think also too about, my family. I come from a long line of active members in the military, from law enforcement. And, I want to take a note too, to make sure that people understand that there are people, and especially on June 26th, on the 47th anniversary of this incident, there are people who are praying for the families of those agents, for Joe Stuntz, who was shot at long range with a sniper rifle. There are people who are collectively all around the world mourning the events of this and all the people who were involved, because it's not just something that echoes into the Native American world. It's into every agents and anybody who's in that judicial system. And there's a lot of just pain that has come from this. And I feel like this is a way to stitch through that and be able to help that healing, because it will heal our nation. It'll heal our connectivity between ourselves as humans. And we won't forget those people who have laid down their lives and for our country. And we won't forget the people who've been railroaded by injustices. And we won't forget until we can all come together and do something about that. And right now, I feel like our movement to be able to bring all those things together is to do the right thing and help get Leonard Peltier home.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's
absolutely. So we will be in touch. Any major announcements, anything that happens, please, let me know. We'll get you back on. Let's keep in touch with everything. And once again, thank you for your time today, and thank you for your ongoing fight for justice.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil.
Cheers. Hello, everyone. I'm about to show you some videos of some celebrities, artists, activists, and supporters of Leonard Peltier who have believed in his innocence for decades, and they have all known that he never got a fair trial, and that if he did, he'd be free, and he'd be with his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren now. I implore all of you to raise your voices up, to battle against the injustice here and other places in life, and speak your mind. Even if your voice shakes, get your voice out there. It's the most important thing that you can do, is to speak for the truth. I want everyone to go ahead and take 30 seconds or 3 minutes of your day, record a video of you talking about Leonard Peltier's case and about the fact that President Biden needs to grant him an executive clemency immediately. Share those on your social media outlets. Share them with your friends. Share them with the constituents and the folks that you vote for. The elected officials, they are there by the power of our votes. And we need to let them know how we believe and how we need them to act in our best interest and behalf. We need to make sure that every single one of these pleas of justice, of reform, of truth to get Leonard Peltier out of prison, that they all land on the desk of President Biden, and that he does the right thing. Something that other presidents have not done, whether it's been by force from FBI agents, and whether it's been people who are afraid of admitting that somebody has been wrongfully put into prison and what that will look like for the criminal justice system. Those things don't matter anymore. What matters is that we free a man that needs to be freed, that somebody who's in his late 70s in poor health and poor health conditions. Prison isn't a place for health conditions. It isn't a place for health care. This man has been inching by year to year. Many people would not still be here. His life is his Sundance. This imprisonment, it's unjust. He needs to go home. President Biden, you need to do the right thing. You need to find the power in your own heart. Reach down deep into your soul and know that the right thing to do is to grant him executive clemency and send him home. Please, everyone, get out there. Write those emails, send those letters, make those phone calls. I'll have every bit of information you need that I'll be putting here in a few minutes on this video for you to be able to contact the people who you need to contact to get this word out. Everybody, get out there. Make your voice count. Do the right thing. The time is now. The place is here. Let's free Leonard Peltier.
Hello, good people. My name is Ani DeFranco, and I am wearing a beaded work of art made by Leonard Peltier. I had a friend many years ago who worked with him in prison. I have been knowing of Leonard's wrongful incarceration since I was in high school, and I'm 51 now. It devastates me to think about the fact that all these years and decades that I've been out there free in the world on my grand adventures, Leonard has been wrongfully incarcerated. please, 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 President Biden, Vice President Harris, please set Leonard Peltier free. He is a political prisoner. He is a leader of his people. He is a beautiful human being. Please set him free, not just to make justice more real, not just for the sake of one man, but for the soul of America. Please set Leonard Peltier free.
Hi, I'm Graham Nash. You know, we haven't treated the Native Americans very well for the last several hundred years, and we know that. In one particular case, we wrongly convicted Leonard Peltier for killing 2 FBI agents many years ago. He has spent 40 years in jail for being wrongly convicted. One word to Mr. President, Mr. Biden, the word clemency. You can straighten it out right now. Clemency for Leonard Peltier. Thank you.
Hi, John Densmore of The Doors. Turtle Island is the name given to this continent we live on. That's right, not America. It's the name that the first peoples of this land gave, and they lived on Turtle Island before we did. So if we have a blind eye as to we took their land by force, then we will be blind to future racial wars that will continue until we acknowledge the first atrocity. How many Indians died? Approximately 100 million. We learned that the buffalo was their food, so we killed 60 million buffalo. President Biden, please grant clemency to Leonard Peltier. It would be healing for the suffering of Native Americans. He's been in prison for 40 years. He's sick. It would be humanitarian. I know. FBI. The FBI protested when Clinton considered pardoning Leonard. 2 lame duck presidents couldn't do it. Don't be the third. Be courageous. And thanks for listening.
Hello, I'm Peter Coyote. I've known Leonard Peltier since before the gunfight that sent him to prison more than 40 years ago. The first 3 men who were accused of the deaths of the 2 FBI agents in that gunfight were acquitted by an all-white jury in North Dakota. The FBI was not going to allow the deaths of 2 agents to go unpunished. They committed a number of judicial errors, falsifying chains of evidence, falsifying the rifle. These things were noted in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. The judge who supervised that appeal, Gerald Heaney, wrote a letter to President Clinton asking for clemency for Leonard. He said the FBI's actions were highly suspect, but his hands were tied. Don Edwards, a 30-year congressman, also a former FBI agent, said that the FBI was completely out of line on that day. They behaved badly, they violated judicial standards, and he came to believe that Leonard was innocent. Now, what Leonard was convicted of was aiding and abetting the murder. He was not convicted of the murder himself, but he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, which made him ineligible for parole. So he's at the end of his life. Had he been convicted of murder, he would have already been up for parole, would have been out on parole after 20 years, 28 years perhaps. He served more than 40. It's time for compassionate release. It's time to let him go home to his people. It's time to begin healing this nation's crimes to Native Americans. And a very good place to start would be releasing Leonard Peltier. Thank you very much.
Hello, this is Tom Morello, sending love and support to Leonard Peltier and all of his supporters. We must continue the fight to free Leonard Peltier, a true American hero. His struggle as a freedom fighter and as a prisoner of war is one that is very important and central to the core of the American injustice system. So Leonard, we love you, man. We're behind you. We will never stop fighting until you're free.
Hi, this is Peter Gabriel in England. The history of the Native American peoples in the United States has been one of theft of land, rights, suffering after suffering, injustice after injustice. And to see Leonard Peltier still in jail more than 40 years after he was wrongfully convicted is a terrible crime. He should be out. He should be able to enjoy his last years as a free man. Please support this campaign.
man kneels by the gray muddy river. He holds in his hand a fistful of dreams. As he tosses those pebbles down into the water, the dreams fall from his eyes in bloody red tears. Peltier, Peltier, I can hear your voice like the great eagle's cry. Peltier, Peltier, it's a good day to die. It's a good day to die. You're the victim, cold cowards and lies. They twisted the truth and wore their disguise. Like the trail of tears, the broken treaties of old. But all the gold in the Black Hills can never buy back their soul. Peltier, Peltier, I can hear your voice like the great eagle's cry. Peltier, Peltier, it's a good day to die. It's a good day to die. They come on to your land and steal you away, holding on like a thief with no price to be paid. Your only crime is your aboriginal skin, but someday they'll break from the weight of their sin. In the spirit, crazy horse you ride, like a bird of dreams singing from the tree of life. Though your body lays shackled behind the walls and the bars, your spirit flies free like a dream in the sky. Peltier, Peltier, I can hear your voice like the great eagle's cry. Peltier, Peltier, it's a good day to die. It's a good day to die. And I pray that someday I will see you again as a free man with your family and friends, holding your pipe as the red lion roars at the foot of the tree where the spirit birds soar. Peltier, Peltier, I can hear your voice like the great eagle's cry. Peltier, Peltier, it's a good day to die. It's a good day to die. It's a good day to die. It's a good day